The hill is not impressive. That is the first thing you notice. No temple, no marble, no Roman columns catching the morning light. Just a long green slope above the Sea of Galilee, damp with dew, smelling of wild herbs and fish wind off the water. And on that slope, hundreds of people. Fishermen with calloused hands. Farmers who got up before dawn. Women carrying children on their hips. Day laborers who haven't found work yet this week and are starting to feel it in their stomachs. They sit down on the grass. And a man from Nazareth sits down too, looks at their faces, really looks at them, and says something that people are still arguing about 2,000 years later. Do not worry about your life. 5 words. Simple words. Words so familiar now that we slide right past them on the way to something we think is more important. We put them on coffee mugs. We stitch them onto throw pillows. We quote them at people who are having panic attacks, as if the problem is they just haven't heard it yet. But here is what you need to understand before we go any further. Those 5 words were not spoken into a comfortable room. They were not a motivational quote for people whose biggest problem was a difficult Monday. They were not easy comfort for easy problems. They were not even primarily a spiritual lesson about trusting God in the abstract. They were a surgical strike, aimed directly at a system, an economic, political, social system, that had been specifically designed to make the people on that hillside anxious, to keep them anxious, to profit from their anxiety. And when you understand what that system was, and who those people were, and what one single Greek word buried inside this passage actually means, the sentence, "Do not worry about your life," stops being a coffee mug and becomes the most countercultural thing anyone has ever said out loud. There is that Greek word, one word, hiding in plain sight inside this passage. A word that changes everything about what Jesus was doing on that hillside. We will get to it, but not yet. First, you need to see the hill. You need to see the faces. You need to understand what worry actually felt like for the people sitting in that grass before a carpenter's son opened his mouth and rearranged the furniture of their souls. Let's talk about taxes. Not the kind you file in April. Not the kind that comes with a deadline and a form and a refund if you're lucky. The kind that comes with soldiers. The kind where if you don't pay, men with weapons show up at your door and take what they want. Your grain, your tools, your children, if necessary. That is the world the Galilean peasant woke up in every single morning. Here is what historians have pieced together about the tax burden on an ordinary family in Galilee during the time of Jesus. You paid Roman imperial tax, roughly 12% of everything you produced. You paid Herod Antipas, the regional ruler appointed by Rome, his cut another 10 to 15%. You paid the temple tax. You paid tolls on roads. You paid duties on fish, if you were a fisherman, on grain if you were a farmer. When scholars ran the numbers, the total burden on a Galilean peasant family could reach 35 to 40% of everything they grew, caught, or made. And these were subsistence farmers. Fishermen pulling nets out of a lake. People who were one bad harvest away from debt. One illness away from selling their land. One season of low catches away from having nothing. Josephus, the Jewish historian who documented life in first-century Galilee, records what Herod Antipas did with some of that tax money. He built a city, a gleaming, Roman-style city on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. Tiberias, named after the emperor. Herod built it on top of a graveyard, ritually unclean ground, and he used conscripted Galilean labor to do it. The same farmers and fishermen who were already paying a third of their income were also being pressed into building a city they would never be allowed to fully enter, named after a man who ruled them from Rome. Stay with me, because this is the ground Jesus was standing on when he said, "Do not worry about your life." These were not people with anxiety disorders. These were not people who needed to practice mindfulness. These were people living inside a system engineered to extract from them and leave them with just enough to come back and to be extracted from again. Their worry was not weakness. It was rational. It was the correct response to their actual circumstances. And Jesus looked at them and said, "Do not be anxious," which brings us to the ravens. Most people read Matthew chapter 6 and pictured gentle sparrows fluttering through a sunny field. And Matthew does say birds of the air. But Luke says something more specific. Luke uses the word ravens. And if you know your Old Testament, that word hits different. Go back roughly 900 years before the Sermon on the Mount. A prophet named Elijah is running for his life. Queen Jezebel has just threatened to kill him. He has been faithful to God for years. Years of drought, years of confrontation, years of standing alone against 450 prophets of Baal. And now he is exhausted, terrified, and hiding in a ravine called Cherith, east of the Jordan River. God tells him to drink from the brook, and then God sends birds to feed him. Not clean birds, not doves, not the kind of bird you'd want anywhere near your food, ravens. Unclean birds, scavengers, the kind of bird that eats carrion and is associated in the Jewish mind with death and defilement. God sent ravens to feed his prophet. Twice a day, morning and evening, the ravens came. With bread, with meat. They came, and they left, and they came again. Not because Elijah deserved it. Not because Elijah had everything figured out. But because God fed him anyway, through the most unlikely messengers imaginable, in the loneliest and most frightened chapter of his life. Here's what most people miss. When Jesus said to that hillside of anxious, overtaxed, exhausted Galileans, "Look at the birds of the air," he was not giving them a nature lesson. He was pointing them back to Elijah in that ravine. He was saying, God fed the prophet through ravens when the prophet was running scared and had nothing. He will feed you too. Now watch what happens next, because there is a man in that crowd. Almost certainly, given what we know about Jesus' ministry in Capernaum, a big-shouldered fisherman named Simon. You probably know him as Peter. And Peter knows exactly what it means to worry about tomorrow. Every morning of Peter's working life began the same way. Before sunrise, out to the boat, nets into the water, and then you wait. Because you cannot make the fish come. You cannot control the lake. You can mend your nets perfectly, position your boat correctly, row to the right side, and still come home with nothing. And if you come home with nothing, there is no bread. This is not a metaphor. This is not a spiritual exercise. This is the literal equation of Peter's life. Nets in, fish out, bread on the table. Nets in, nothing out, children go hungry. Jesus said to a man who lived inside that equation every single day of his life, "Do not be anxious about what you will eat or drink." You know what Peter did not do? He did not roll his eyes. He did not walk away. He did not say, "Easy for you to say." He stayed. He listened. He eventually left his nets entirely and followed this man, which meant trusting that somehow, someway, food would come without the nets, that the equation could be rewritten, that there was a math more reliable than morning catches and market prices. That is not a small thing. That is one of the most radical acts of trust in the entire New Testament, and it starts here, on this hillside, with 5 words. Do not worry about your life. So here is where we are. A hillside in Galilee, a crowd of people carrying real weight. Not imagined weight, not exaggerated weight, but the actual, documented, historically verified weight of living under an empire that taxed them to the edge of survival. And into that crowd, Jesus speaks. Not to shame them for worrying, not to tell them their anxiety is a character flaw, but to reframe the entire question, to point them toward something, someone, more reliable than any system the empire ever built. We are about to go deeper into exactly what Jesus said, word by word. Because there is a Greek word buried in this passage that I promised you at the beginning, and when you hear it, the whole sermon shifts. If this kind of deep look at Scripture is what you're here for, make sure you're subscribed. And drop a comment below. Tell me, what is the worry that follows you into tomorrow? What is the thing you keep turning over in your mind at night? I read every single comment. We will come back to that question at the end of this video. But right now, stay with me, because we are just getting to the part that changes everything. Let's go back to the text. Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. That word, worry. In the original Greek, the word is merimnaō, and it does not mean what we usually think it means. We think worry is a feeling, a mood, something that comes over you like weather. You are worried, the way you are tired or cold or sad. Merimnaō is not that. Merimnaō comes from 2 Greek roots, merizo, which means to divide, and nous, which means mind. Literally, merimnaō means a mind that has been divided against itself, a mind pulled in 2 directions at once. A mind that cannot land anywhere because it is trying to serve 2 things simultaneously and failing at both. Say that again. Because it matters. Worry, in the Greek, is not primarily an emotion. It is a state of division, a split loyalty, a heart trying to stand on two foundations at the same time. And now look at what Jesus says 2 verses before the worry passage. Verse 24, "No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon." Mammon, another word worth stopping for. This is an Aramaic word, the language Jesus actually spoke in daily life, and it does not simply mean money. Mammon carries the weight of something you trust, something you lean on, something you have quietly decided is your real security, your real future, your real foundation. Jesus is not saying money is evil. He is saying that money makes a terrible god. Not because wealth is wrong, but because mammon, the system, the security, the empire of things you are accumulating to protect yourself from tomorrow, cannot actually do what you are asking it to do. It cannot give you the one thing your divided mind is desperately searching for: peace. And here's the part nobody tells you. Jesus does not just diagnose the problem and leave you there. He gives you a picture. 2 pictures, actually. And both of them are things you can see with your eyes on a Galilean morning: birds and flowers. Look at the birds of the air, he says. They do not sow, they do not reap, they do not store in barns. And yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of much more value than they? Pay attention to this. Jesus is not telling you to stop working. The birds are not lazy. Ravens fly hundreds of miles searching for food. Sparrows are up before dawn. The point is not that they do nothing. The point is that they are not divided. They are not trying to serve mammon. They are not running a backup plan in case God doesn't come through. They live fully, completely, without a split mind, inside a single trust. That is what Jesus is pointing to. And then the flowers. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist writing in the 1st century, describes the hillsides of Galilee in spring as covered in anemone coronaria, a wild red flower, vivid as a flame, growing in carpets across the slopes. The same slopes Jesus was standing on. The crowd could look down and see them while he spoke. Solomon, the wealthiest king in Israel's history. A man who built a temple so magnificent that when the Queen of Sheba saw it, she had no breath left in her. A man whose robes were purple, real purple, dye extracted from sea snails at a cost that made it worth more than gold. A man who had everything mammon could offer, and a wildflower on a Galilean hillside, here for one season and gone, is more beautifully dressed than he ever was. This is not a gentle observation. This is a demolition. Jesus is not saying, try not to think about money so much. He is dismantling the entire framework that made mammon feel necessary. He is saying, the thing you are trusting to protect you is not as powerful as you think. And the one you are hesitant to fully trust is more faithful than you know. And then he says the thing that I think is most misunderstood in this entire passage. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Read that last sentence again. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Jesus is not promising a trouble-free life. He is not saying that if you trust God, hard things won't happen. He is saying something far more specific and far more honest. He is saying, do not pre-suffer tomorrow. Do not take tomorrow's possible pain and drag it into today and live inside it now, on top of today's actual pain. That is not faith. That is not wisdom. That is a divided mind torturing itself with a future it cannot control. Which brings us to Mary, not Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary of Bethany, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. You know this scene. Jesus comes to their home in Bethany. Martha is doing what needs to be done. Cooking, serving, managing the household, making sure everyone is fed. And Mary sits at Jesus' feet. Listening Martha, worn out and frustrated, says to Jesus, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. And Jesus says something that has puzzled people ever since. He says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. The word Jesus uses for Martha's state, anxious, troubled, is merimnaō. The divided mind again. Martha is not doing anything wrong. The work is real. The meal is necessary. But her mind is divided between the serving and the servant. between the meal and the one who said he was the bread of life. Between tomorrow's worries dragged into this moment and the single thing that is actually available right now. His presence. Mary chose the undivided thing. That is what Jesus is asking for in the Sermon on the Mount. Not the absence of work, not the denial of trouble, not the pretending that tomorrow doesn't come, the undivided heart, the single foundation. The one master, skake first his kingdom, basileia in Greek, his active, dynamic breaking in reign, and all these things will be added to you, not instead of the trouble. Through it, I want you to think about a specific kind of night. You know the one. 2, maybe 3 in the morning. The house is quiet. Everyone else is asleep. And you are lying on your back in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and your mind is running the numbers again. The mortgage, the diagnosis, the job that might not be there next month, the child who is making choices that terrify you, the relationship that is fraying at the edges and you don't know how to stop it. You run the numbers. You run them again. You try a different arrangement of the same facts and get the same answer. You try to sleep. You cannot sleep. You stare at the ceiling some more. This is merimnaō at 3 in the morning. The divided mind. Pulled between what you can control and what you cannot. Between the God you say you trust and the tomorrow you are desperately trying to manage on your own. Every person watching this video knows that ceiling. And here is where I need to take you somewhere you may not have expected this video to go. Because the most important moment in the entire conversation about worry, the moment that proves whether Jesus meant what he said, is not on the Galilean hillside. It is in a garden, at night. And the man doing the praying is Jesus himself. Gethsemane, the word means oil press. It is an olive grove on the western slope of the Mount of Olives, just outside Jerusalem, a short walk from the city walls. Jesus knows what is coming. He is known for a long time. He has told his disciples 3 times in plain language what will happen in Jerusalem. Betrayal, trial, death. A death so specific and so brutal that Roman citizens were legally protected from it. Crucifixion was reserved for slaves and insurrectionists, for the people the empire wanted to make an example of. Jesus knows all of this, and he goes to the garden anyway, and he kneels, and he prays the most honest prayer in the New Testament. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Do you hear that? The man who stood on a hillside and said, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow," is now facing the worst tomorrow in the history of the world. And he is asking, with everything in him, for a different outcome. He is not performing composure. He is not modeling detachment. Luke tells us he sweated drops of blood. The Greek word Luke uses is agonia, agony, real agony, the kind that comes when the full weight of what is coming lands on you in the dark. This is not a man who avoided Gethsemane to get to the resurrection. This is not a man who skipped the hard night to reach the bright morning. This is not a man for whom trust in God meant the absence of grief or fear or the desperate human wish that things could be different. He went through it, fully, without flinching from a single second of it. And then, after the agony, after the honest prayer, after the sweat and the grief and the asking for another way, he says 5 more words. 5 words that answer the 5 words on the hillside. Not my will, but yours. That is the undivided heart in action. Not the absence of trouble, not the denial of grief, not the pretending that tomorrow isn't terrifying, but the single, clear, unbroken line of trust that runs through the middle of the worst night of his life and comes out the other side, still pointing in the same direction. Your Father knows what you need. Not my will, but yours. This is what Jesus was pointing to on the hillside. Not a feeling, not a mood, not a spiritual trick to make anxiety disappear. He was pointing to a posture, an orientation, a way of holding the future that keeps the mind from dividing against itself, even when the future looks like a cross. And here is what Paul understood about this, writing from a prison cell in Rome to a church in Philippi that was itself under pressure, uncertain, afraid. He uses a word we have not talked about yet, the Greek word agony, peace, but not peace the way we use it, not the absence of conflict, not the quiet of an empty room. Agony is the peace of wholeness, completeness, the shalom of the Hebrew mind carried into Greek, the peace of a person who is fully integrated, not divided, not split, not running 2 operating systems at once. Paul says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." And the agony of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds. Guard. The Greek word is phoreo, a military term, a garrison, armed soldiers stationed at the gate. Paul is saying that the peace of God is not a feeling that comes and goes with your circumstances. It is a guard. It stands at the entrance of your heart and your mind, that divided, anxious, ceiling-staring mind, and it does not let the enemy in. Not the enemy of doubt. Not the enemy of fear. Not the enemy of the 3 in the morning number running. This is not positive thinking. This is not self-talk. This is not a breathing exercise. This is the agony that was in the Garden of Gethsemane. The peace that was present while the sweat fell like blood. The wholeness that held while every human instinct screamed for a different tomorrow. And it is available to you right now, in your specific, actual documented worry. The one with your name on it. The one about the person you love who is sick. The one about the job. The one about the job. The one about the decision you have to make with information you don't have yet. The one that has been following you into tomorrow for longer than you want to admit. Jesus did not say your tomorrow will be easy. He did not say the thing you fear won't happen. He said something harder and truer and more useful than either of those things. He said your Father knows. He said the same God who feeds ravens in ravines and clothes wildflowers in glory, that outshines a king, the same God who met Elijah in his most exhausted and terrified moment and sent birds with bread, that God sees you, knows what you need, is not surprised by your tomorrow, is already there, and that the divided mind, merimnaō, the mind trying to serve 2 masters at once, trying to trust God and control the future simultaneously, that mind is a kind of suffering that was never meant for you. The invitation is not to stop caring about your life. The invitation is to stop carrying it alone. So let me leave you with 3 things. The first is this. Do not worry is not a command to feel differently. It is a command to trust differently. Jesus is not telling you to pretend the hard thing isn't hard. He is not telling you to manufacture cheerfulness in the middle of grief. He is not asking you to perform peace while your stomach is in knots. He is asking you to bring the knots to the right place, to the Father who fed Elijah through ravens, to the God who clothes wildflowers in glory that outshines a king, to the one who already knows what you need before you ask. The command is not, stop feeling anxious. The command is, stop dividing your trust. Give it whole to the one who can actually hold tomorrow. The second thing is harder. Worry is not just a feeling. You know this now. Merimnaō, the divided mind, is a state of serving 2 masters at once. And the reason it is exhausting is not because you are weak. It is because no mind was ever built to run that way. You were not designed to simultaneously trust God and control your future. The architecture doesn't support it. Every hour you spend trying to manage tomorrow by your own strength is an hour your mind spends divided against itself. And a divided mind is its own punishment. It is its own suffering. Long before the thing you fear ever arrives, worry has already cost you something. It has cost you today. Jesus knew this. That is why he said it. And the third thing, the one I want you to carry out of this video and into whatever tomorrow is waiting for you. Jesus did not skip Gethsemane. He did not go from the Sermon on the Mount straight to the empty tomb, bypassing the hard night, bypassing the agony, bypassing the prayer that asked for a different way. He went through the garden. He sweated through it. He grieved through it. He asked, honestly and without pretending, for the cup to be taken away. And then he said, not my will, but yours. That sentence is the whole sermon. That sentence is the answer to merimnaō. That sentence is what an undivided heart sounds like when it is standing in the worst moment of its life, staring at the worst tomorrow it has ever faced, and choosing, not because the fear is gone, not because the grief is resolved, not because the outcome is clear, choosing to trust the Father anyway. You will have a Gethsemane. Maybe you are in one right now. Maybe the ceiling you stare at is that garden, dark, quiet, the weight of tomorrow pressing down on your chest while everyone else sleeps. Jesus went there first. He knows what that ground feels like under your knees. And he came through it, not around it, not above it, but through it, with an undivided heart. So can you, before you go, I want to ask you one question, and I genuinely want to know your answer. What is the tomorrow you are most afraid of right now? Not in the abstract, the specific one, the one with your name on it. Tell me in the comments below. You do not have to explain it. You can just name it. And know that you are not alone in that garden. If this video opens something up for you, share it with someone who is lying awake tonight. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper into Scripture together. And I will see you in the next one, because each day has enough trouble of its own. And each day, also, has enough grace.